Loosening up or how to get a looser painting is one of the most common questions I probably get asked. And it's funny, painting the way that I do, I think more found me than me finding it. I think ultimately just painted, and however it comes out, that's actually the way I paint. So much so, I remember when I was probably 24, 25, having an exhibition and someone said, "Oh, you're an impressionist." And I hadn't really thought in those terms. Really, I was just a painter ultimately. But I do loved the energy, that visual excitement that you can get in your work by just loosening edges and not tightening up. I think the aspect of tightening up is probably one of the most common things that we do as human beings. We're always wanting to make the painting more realistic, more interesting, more of everything. But eventually there comes a tipping point where it then becomes looking a little visually boring or a little overdone, and there's almost like the person's tried to tell you 50 things when you only needed 5 things. And I think that's the beauty. So I think these, for me, are some of the great masters of painting loose, or some of the artists that I've really been inspired with. And when it comes to brushwork and editing and edges, and that's really what mostly it is about, Richard Schmidt's really the top of the tree. He was, I believe, highly influenced by Mancini, the Italian painter Antonio Mancini, Nikolai Feschen, and quite a few other artists, of course. But I think when I look at his work, they're the two that probably I can see the most overriding influence on his work. And with this one, the background, it's almost like an abstract painting, really. And I think that's what we're touching on when we're drifting towards or wanting looser work. That's what we're really engaging with, because realism is that more tight, sometimes even less colour as well. But I think it's got a lot more to do with the actual brushwork and also the sharpness and looseness of our edges. So let's delve into it. Schmidt also was the master at where and how to place his lights and darks, and that visual narrative, and how he would get you to communicate with his painting. So that lovely little bit of light there, but not being overridden by the faces and the figures. Once again, when it's just a simple little park bench, 2 people there sharing an intimate moment. Of course, the painting is beautifully painted, and we cannot get away. You just cannot paint loose for looseness' sake and be under, or I can't, I know, and then be under the illusion that that's a better painting than anything that's tighter or more realistic. Because some scenes do lend themselves. Foliage is a great one to be able to loosen up in, because it's probably one of nature's great difficulties to paint, but also one of its great little entities that we can tap into. So there's certain areas and objects, city scenes, still life, figurative work can be a little harder, because we still need to tap into the realistic side as well. And I think that's probably what Richard did so beautifully, is that he was one of the rare painters that could paint so abstract, but also quite realistic in the same painting. Not in different paintings, but in the same painting. So you can see sort of the shoes, the feet, that little aspect there. And the best way that I can explain, I think, is a realist painting is almost like a full circle, not one little edge missing. We're going to put everything that we see. But an impressionist and looser painting is where we're trying to create the illusion of the circle, but we're also trying to leave out as much as possible. So what that has taught me and teaches us is that we need to rely on our found edges, our found marks, far more than if we were going more realistic or if we're wanting to paint tighter, because sometimes putting a little bit more detail in and painting a little tighter is the ideal thing for that painting. So when we have a look at the edges coming up the shin of this one and then into the figure, most of the edges are beautifully lost, and you would think, oh geez, that is so loose. But once again, the looser we want to go means the tighter we need to go when we're getting that found edge. So actually, one of the best ways to explain this, let's actually lose some of the nice little found edges. So that's the big quantum shift really, is in my thinking, and I think in the thinking that we need to do, is to, and this feels terrible, to be defacing or to changing one of Richard's paintings. But you can see by losing that nice little light on the wrist and the hand, and the darkening the shapes on the figure of the face and the arm. I didn't really loosen the shapes there, but let's even just loosen them up a little as well. So, because we can go too loose, and that will, or as I like to think, too loose Lautrec. So if we lose too much definition, then that shape and the story that we're trying to tell, the emphasis that we're trying to bring to the painting. So that was a Schmidt. And now we have a Nikolai Feschen. So Feschen, I think, passed away in the mid-1950s. I think it was 1955. So he was the predecessor almost to Richard. But when we have a look at that background, that really is almost like an abstract painting. There's lost, found, mostly lost, and that's the key. So in the next tile, I will use a photo so we can start to, there's one thing showing how it's already been done, and that's kind of almost like I'm using a cheat sheet. I'm actually getting to the answer before learning how to do it, but I'll do that in the next one. So when we have a look at this, we can actually, there's not really even much arm down through there. So that's interesting. So then we have medium strength edge, and then have a look at that fantastic profile that's driven and drives the eye, because it's when our focal point isn't interesting enough, or we don't mimic the contrast, the edges, the color, and that's when a painting really falls apart. And a great way to show how that can happen is either where you see in your own painting, as you're standing back, just try and hold your thumb up over, let's say, the face, the figure, the building, or that object. So to remove, and that's what I do as a checklist. If something's not working, or if I think my painting's working, and I love to just double check just to see how things are going, I'll place that thumb in front of it, just to double check, just to see if I've got the effect that I want, and how is my secondary and tertiary as well, because we can have a great primary focal point, and that's where composition does really come into it, because as we saw with Richard's painting, primary focal point up here, secondary, and almost this shape here could be seen as our tertiary. So that does also place a high level of importance and need for our, not only of course our light and dark, our brush mark, our edges, but also our composition. So now we have a photo, one of my favorite subjects, a chicken with a few little ones. So as I would, before I ever start, I almost need to know 95% of how the painting's going to look before I even start. So then I know I'm not going to spend 2 to 6 hours, depending on the size of the painting, on a fruitless pursuit. So have a look at that for a fantastic primary focal point. this little chick here is a little awkward when it comes to its shape more than anything, but I would use this as a secondary, and not so much because it's strong or contrast, but it's a big shape. So I'd be going 1, 2, 3 for my focal areas. So I've looked at the contrast first, then looked for composition. And the great thing with loosening up, normally we've got the painting well in control, the painting's working, so then I'll start to analyse the edges. So we could almost say that that's a way to colour grade our edges. So we're going from the brightest, that's the warmest red, that's going to have the brightest and the sharpest edges, and then a secondary and then a tertiary. So we need to know where we're going to be losing edges and softening edges and not putting as much emphasis as well. Because really with this subject, once I got that guy working, this one working, and I almost am tempted to leave that guy out. I might even draw over that shape in this form, just to start to learn how to sort of get rid of it. Unfortunately, my pen is just playing up there a little. So yeah, so we can even eradicate things. And I think this is just double check it, it's the painting old brush. And this is another great way to, once you finish your painting, you can actually draw over it to see, okay, have I gone a little too tight? If I loosen this, loosen that, so you put your image in and work over it. But the painting, the old brush with the painting is one of my favorites. It almost gives the closest thing to an impressionist or brush mark. And sometimes when I'm doing it, or using it, I should say, it almost feels like a Richard Schmidt brush mark, to be honest. It has that ability to mostly loosen, but when I bring I'll just go a little darker and a little stronger. When I bring the brush size down, I can get really nice sharp edges as well. And then if I go bigger, when I want to loosen something, I get a lot looser. So that's a great way to even push your own work to the next level. That's why I highly recommend the evolution of art. For me, I was always kind of behind the ball with technology, I believe. Late-ish to come to even digital cameras, even though that was probably 2005 when I got my first one. But in the last 5 years, when we're looking for that extra 5% here, 5% there to improve or enhance or understand what I'm doing, Apple Pencil or the pencil and a tablet and Procreate, which is fantastic. There are a couple of other ones, but I think that's probably the best one. This painting is by Douglas Badcock, another great landscape painter, primarily New Zealand painter, probably, I think, one of their greatest impressionists, pretty well, no doubt. Some of his paintings, because they were done on the spot, big paintings, so he was working fast and rapid. He'd even catch a helicopter up into the snow area and paint there and get picked up hours later. So talk about pressure and cost as well, not only for time and for the cost that you're investing in your work. But I feel he had a marvellous brushwork, would exercise lovely looseness. And that's where I think even using some worn-out brushes can be helpful. So I've got two of my own here. An interior that's primarily a tighter subject, almost like a still life or a figurative type thing, where if we drift too far from realism or too far from what's there, we can get into a little bit of strife. Where the other one, a little beach scene, that's almost the perfect. I almost think landscape seascapes are the ideal abstraction for an impressionist painter because we have a lot more leeway. But this one was painted with an Eclipse Coma that was about a year old, and it was almost sort of what you would think is worn out, and actually almost that much so that I had put it aside thinking, I'll just keep one. That one's worn out. I'll just keep it to make sure I buy the right size, the right everything. And I was doing a painting and I thought, you know what, I'm getting a little tight myself. So I grabbed that supposedly worn out brush, and this was one of the paintings I did about 10 or 15 with that brush and kept almost entirely with that brush. And then I would ask students, if you're ever throwing out any wood, and I didn't get any offers for once I showed them what you could do. So it is quite powerful to have those semi to worn out. You need a brush that can still hold paint. And that's when I knew that Eclipse comber that I thought I'd put the tag on worn out was truly worn out, because I just couldn't pick up enough paint to be able to then apply in big enough areas. But you can see the difference in approaches. I'm able to go looser in the background, go looser in the shadows. And that's where painting loose should start, in the shadows. I think when you're starting, if you have no noise around you, I normally like a bit of music going, but you almost should be able to hear your brush mark when you're starting. That with a hog hair is great because it's naturally gives us those lovely loose brush marks. And then I'll go to the smaller brushes and the Eclipse combers, the Master's Choice, those sort of synthetic-y ones that will actually lose brush texture compared to the brush texture that I want. And the final thing I think that I shall finish on, when it comes to painting loose, I want to think of my sky as a fine piece of silk, even if it's a big, when it comes to texture, even if it's a big dramatic sky, sun sort of clouds and stormy, I'm still looking at trying to think of it as a piece of silk, fine piece of silk, very soft, very smooth and not much texture. The mid distance wants to be almost like cotton, almost like the shirt that I'm wearing. You can feel the weave, you can see the weave almost, you can see the texture in it. But the foreground wants to be like burlap or shag carpet, as the other saying is, where you can see. And especially with landscapes, we can put more aggressive brush marks in the foreground, smoothing them off, and then the smoothest. So that's another way to not only control the amount of brush mark or lack of brush mark, but also for getting depth as well. So as with painting, there's endless things that we need to learn, hope to learn. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed this one. It was a fun topic. So all the best. Bye for now.